And I do want to get into some breaking news that we are following right now coming in on the Russia-Ukraine war. Take a look at this video that's just coming in via Storyful as Russian special forces walked miles inside a gas pipeline to strike Ukrainian units from behind in the Kursk region. Ukraine's military and Russian war bloggers are reporting this here moments ago as Moscow moves to recapture parts of its border province that Kyiv seized in a shock offensive. According to Telegram posts by a Ukrainian-born pro-Kremlin blogger, Russian operatives walked about 9 miles inside the pipeline, which Moscow had until recently used to send gas to Europe. Some Russian troops had spent several days in the pipe before striking Ukrainian units from behind. Now, all of this here coming as we have learned that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expected to meet with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia tomorrow, but it appears he will not stick around as Ukrainian and American delegations meet to talk about the war with Russia. This comes after that explosive Oval Office conversation between Zelensky and President Trump 1 week ago. As always, so much to discuss here, so I do want to bring in a guest to help break it down. We have Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, an emeritus professor of war studies at King's College London. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help discuss this a little bit further.
Good to be with you.
All right, so first off, I do want to talk just a little bit here about some information coming in about that meeting between President Zelensky and the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia. What exactly is the purpose of that meeting overall?
Well, Saudi Arabia now appears to be the location for the talks. The Crown Prince presumably may have some role, and I think President Zelensky is extremely keen to demonstrate that whatever's going on, Ukraine is part of it. So I don't think it's a big move, but I think it's important to him to demonstrate that in any conversation that's going on, Ukraine is there. I think also, given that Ukrainian negotiators will be meeting with, I think, National Security Advisor Waltz and Secretary of State Rubio just after that, he wants to be part of sort of preparation for that, but it wouldn't be expected, I don't think, that he would be part of the actual negotiation.
And is that significant? I mean, you were just talking about this, but is it significant that Zelensky is not expected to attend the talks between the American delegation and Ukrainian delegation? Is it likely this has something to do with that explosive Oval Office meeting, or could it just be he's not going to be there?
Yeah, I think it's probably more the latter. I mean, possibly it's relevant, but just as when they met with the Russian delegation, Putin wasn't there, you wouldn't particularly expect in an ongoing negotiation, of which potentially there's going to be a number of rounds, that this would be handled by the president himself. So I don't think it's that surprising or significant.
President Trump said on Friday that he's finding it, quote unquote, difficult to work with Ukraine. Can that relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine be fixed? Is it possible to repair that? Again, we keep talking about it, but that's after that big explosive conversation there that happened in the White House Oval Office.
Well, I think the Ukrainians are pretty anxious to fix it because they've had intelligence and military support withdrawn, and this is already causing problems. So it's not a trivial matter for them, and they've tried to say the right things about the mineral deal, about their desire for a ceasefire and peace and so on. So President Trump says he's waiting and seeing, and that's why the first round of talks may be extremely important. So it potentially can be repaired. The Ukrainians, I'm pretty sure, want it to be repaired, but it's not clear at the moment what it will take to convince President Trump that this is that enough is being done.
What do Ukrainians overall think of Volodymyr Zelensky as the president there? Is he a popular president? I've spoken to several experts about this, and they've had, varying things to say. But what are your thoughts overall on how he's viewed there in Ukraine by his citizens?
Well, I think Zelensky is viewed as being done a pretty impressive job as a war leader, as an ambassador for Ukraine, as gathering international support immediately after the full-scale invasion. There are doubts about, as with any political leader, about his performance at home. But I think one of the things to note is that whereas before that Oval Office meeting, his support was in the sort of low 50s amongst Ukrainians, since then it's gone up into the mid 60%. This, as with other countries people don't like it when it seems like another government is trying to tell them who should be their leader. So he's got general support at the moment in Ukraine. He's not in any sense an illegitimate leader.
And I have to ask, because we talk about, the fact that there can't be elections there in Ukraine right now. Can you kind of explain why that is the case?
Well, you've got a country that's at war, that cities are being regularly bombed, with 20% of it under occupation, with a third of the population displaced or refugees, with large numbers in the armed forces. It would be a pretty difficult task to actually hold a free and fair election in those circumstances, and the Ukrainian constitution doesn't expect it when there's martial law. So it's not that this is sort of some deliberate ploy by Zelensky to hold on to power. It's just a pretty hopeless situation at the moment in which you can hold an election. I think that there would be an assumption that once there was a degree of peace, they would move pretty sharply to restore normal democratic forms.
The U.S. has, of course, stopped that military sharing of intelligence there with Ukraine amid the war. This, again, coming after that Oval Office exchange between President Trump and Zelensky. How pivotal is the U.S. information and the U.S. help in Ukraine winning the war against Russia based on your expertise and what you know about it?
It's important, especially at the moment. The normal sort of breakdown at the moment is well over half of what Ukraine fights with, it produces itself. About 25% comes from Europeans and about 20% comes from the US. But the US is pretty high end, and the intelligence support is really important. And we've seen in recent days how Russia can take advantage of, say, a lack of early warning that this gives the Ukrainians. So it is important. It's not enough, I think, to stop them fighting. And I think we have to be careful about talking about victory for either side. This is a war that's pretty deadlocked, where there's been very little movement in the front lines for a long time, bits and pieces, but nothing, no real breakthroughs. So, I mean, the prospect for both sides is of a continuing grinding war rather than a move to victory. But this certainly, at the moment, is helping the Russians.
And I have to ask, because we are following, as I mentioned, this breaking news that's coming in out of the region right now, as it appears that, Russian troops have walked miles and miles into that pipeline. What are your thoughts about that situation as it does develop? Again, we do have limited information overall, but I want to get your initial thoughts.
Yeah, there is limited information, and it's obviously one has to be pretty careful about speculating too much. There are some other reports from Ukrainian sources that quite a lot of those going through the pipeline were caught and killed. But there's clearly pressure on the Ukrainian position in Kursk. And there's two main battle areas. One is Kursk, the other is eastern Ukraine. And actually, the Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine has slowed down in recent months, and maybe they're putting a different priority now on Kursk, because if you are moving to ceasefire negotiations, they won't want Ukrainians in controlling any of their territory, whereas they struggle to make the sort of progress they expected in the east.
All right. We do appreciate it, of course. Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, Emeritus Professor of War Studies there at King's College London. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and help break down those latest developments. Anything you want to add before I let you go?
Well, I think it just is important to know, because the opposite is often said, that Russia has shown no interest in a ceasefire. What Russia wants is a peace deal followed by a ceasefire. and it worries me at the moment that the impression is around that it's Ukrainians really dragging their feet on this. Every opportunity the Russians get, they try to say that their position is completely unchanged since last June when they set it out, and that a ceasefire is not what they're after. They want a full peace deal, and also, of course, they want to get essentially through negotiations what they failed to achieve through military action.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to join us here and help discuss this. Of course, a situation that will continue to develop, so I'm sure we'll be in touch with you again. Thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. Bye.